Most people show up to art auctions with an invitation and a checkbook. I arrived with a pressed dress, neutral lipstick, and a stomach full of rehearsed silence. My name's Courtney. I was 28 when my father had me escorted out of the winter glass auction by security, in front of donors, press, and his colleagues. I flew across the country without telling him. It wasn't meant to be dramatic. I just wanted to see if he'd notice. Or if, maybe for the first time in 5 years, we'd be in the same room without flinching. The gala was hosted inside the Cambridge Museum, a postmodern box of light and glass dropped right in the middle of downtown San Diego. People floated through the atrium like paper lanterns, men in pressed black suits, women in silk the color of moonlight. The energy buzzed, humming with money and competition masked as charm. I walked slowly. The hem of my dress skimmed the floor, my heels tapping soft on polished granite. I hadn't been inside this museum since it reopened. My chest tightened when I saw the new East Wing. He stood across the room near the auctioneer's podium, laughing with someone from the donor board. His tuxedo hung perfectly, and his champagne glass never tilted too far. He hadn't aged, he'd just polished the edges. Our eyes met. He didn't blink. Then he leaned toward a man in a black suit with an earpiece. I thought he was joking. I thought maybe he was asking for help with the guest list or adjusting his mic, until the man started walking directly toward me. Ma'am, he said, low and calm, we're going to need to ask you to step outside. I blinked. Excuse me? Your name's not on the list, he replied, a bit firmer now. I'm a registered donor, I said. Silent patron, Tier 4. I RSVP'd under Barrett Holdings. He didn't flinch. Mr. Barrett has requested that you be removed immediately. Everything froze. It wasn't loud, not yet, but the silence around us grew teeth. A couple near the sculpture display turned to look. A woman at the wine bar paused mid-pour. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just felt everything inside me collapse inward. Fast, neat, and cold. I followed the guard through the foyer, past the mural I'd helped save 3 years ago, past the donor wall where my name was absent by choice, not accident. I had meant to stay invisible, but being erased was something else. Outside, the air was warm, dry. Wind scraped across the marble steps like static. I didn't call a car. I just stood there, my fingers locked around the clutch I hadn't opened all evening. I wanted to scream, or laugh, or vanish. Instead, I turned. Just one glance back. The man who once called me his pride and joy stood beneath golden lights, smiling for the photographers like nothing had happened. He didn't even look toward the door. But someone else did. In the far right corner of the mezzanine, past the banner of tonight's feature, a woman in gray with a clipboard met my gaze. Just for a second. Her expression didn't shift, but her eyes did. She knew. And that was enough to shift something inside me. Not break it, but sharpen it. Let him pose, let him pretend. The gala wasn't over. And neither was I. I didn't move for 5 minutes. Just stood there on the museum steps, clutch frozen in my hands, watching black sedans glide past like shadows with tinted windows. The hum of the gala inside pulsed through the glass behind me. Music, applause, silverware on porcelain. It was like being locked out of a life I helped decorate. I adjusted my dress, turned on my heel, and started walking. Fast, controlled, like I knew exactly where I was going. In truth, I had no idea. But there was one thing I did know. The Cambridge Museum had more than one entrance. I circled the block once, letting the sound of my heels settle the riot in my chest. The air tasted like marble dust and lemon trees. Around the back, near the staff parking lot, stood a metal service door. Half open, propped with a mop bucket, a catering van was still unloading linens. No one looked at me twice. I ducked inside like I belonged there. The hallway smelled like citrus cleaner and burnt espresso. Yellow tiles, gray crates, steel doors with numbered plaques. I moved quietly, but not timidly. I knew this place. I'd walked these halls in heels sharper than these and made decisions that affected million-dollar exhibits. Tonight, I was just a ghost retracing her own steps. I kept going until I reached the staircase near the freight elevator. A man in a linen vest came around the corner balancing a tray of empty wine glasses. He glanced up. I didn't stop. I looked straight through him like I was late for a lighting inspection. He didn't question me. He wouldn't. People never do when you move with purpose. At the top of the stairs, I heard the music swell. Strings and brass, polished laughter. The doors ahead were marked, authorized personnel only. But that wasn't new. I pushed through them with the same hands that once signed off on exhibit layouts. The mezzanine unfolded before me in golden glass. Below, the auction floor buzzed with anticipation. A Rothko reproduction flashed on a digital display. My father stood dead center, hand on a woman's back. Probably a donor's wife or a new executive assistant. His smile looked carved from stone and polished with ego. I didn't breathe. Then I turned left. Behind the installation wall, half concealed, stood a narrow balcony that overlooked the sculpture garden. The evening breeze slipped in through the cracks, brushing my shoulder like memory. I leaned on the railing and listened. One floor below, the announcer tapped the microphone. Tonight's next piece is one of the most anticipated in the collection. American Absence, a privately held work, never before shown in public. Courtesy of an anonymous benefactor who wishes to support the preservation of American realism. The room hushed. I didn't move. I'd seen this painting before. I knew the provenance better than anyone in the room. I knew who shipped it, who restored the frame, who paid for insurance when the gallery almost backed out. They applauded. He nodded like it was his gift. But that's when I noticed the woman from earlier, the one with the clipboard and the still eyes. She stood in the shadows of the control booth, not looking at him, not looking at the auctioneer. She looked up. At me. And with the tiniest gesture, one finger pressed against her lips, she mouthed a single word. Wait. She told me to wait, but not why. The moment our eyes met across the mezzanine, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. She wasn't just a staffer. The clipboard, the headset, the poised stillness. She was someone who knew things before they happened. I watched her until the applause below died down. Then I stepped back into the corridor behind the wall, into shadows and industrial track lights humming quietly overhead. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned left, deeper into the guts of the building. The Cane Bridge wasn't just a gallery. It was a maze of preservation rooms, archival chambers, and VIP prep lounges hidden behind exhibits, places you don't see on the tour. The wall labels blurred as I moved. Porcelain repair, textile humidification, authentication desk. Then I heard voices. One low, one sharp, a third, older, cautious. They were down the hall, around the corner, just past a cracked door with no label. I slowed, flattened myself against the wall, listened. You told me she wouldn't show. My father's voice, sharp, controlled, but with that undertone, panic behind practiced calm. She wasn't on any of our rosters. I double-checked every foundation entry. Another man said. You specifically said. I said she was out of the picture, Dad snapped. That's not the same as banned. And now she's wandering around in plain sight. Should we call the floor manager? A pause. Then something softer. A woman's voice this time. She's already seen the floor plan. If she's here, it's not to mingle. I held my breath. The air around me felt like static. No one said my name, but they didn't have to. I can't have her making a scene tonight, my father continued. Not in front of the press. Not in front of Helen. Helen. That name landed like a slap. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. You think she came to make a scene? The woman said quietly. Another pause. No, he said. That's the problem. She doesn't need to say a word. Silence. Then soft footsteps. I ducked back around the corner just as the door opened and a man in a navy blazer stepped out. I didn't recognize him. He walked briskly toward the east wing, phone to his ear. I pressed deeper into the shadows. If they saw me, I'd be escorted out again. This time not as a silent guest, but as a threat. And I wasn't ready to be that. Not yet. Not until I knew why they were afraid. I turned and moved back the way I came, keeping my steps silent, ears wide open. Every doorway I passed now pulsed with invisible weight. Every glance felt loaded. Invisibility had always been my weapon. It wasn't about hiding. It was about seeing more than they thought I could. And what I saw tonight was simple. They weren't surprised I was here. They were scared. Of what, I didn't know. But I would. I retraced my steps to the mezzanine, moving with the kind of grace that only comes from being underestimated. Below, the auction surged forward. The numbers were getting higher, the bidders more animated. The lights dimmed between lots, softening the crowd into silhouettes. On stage, a curator in silver heels gestured toward a glass sculpture that shimmered like frozen smoke. I leaned against the wall near the exit sign, half hidden behind a velvet drape. For a moment, I just listened. Breathing had become easier. Watching him, my father, laugh and sip and perform wasn't as painful as it had been an hour ago. Not because I cared less, but because I finally understood what scared him. He knew I hadn't come here alone. And I didn't mean guests. When I turned to step away from the curtain, I nearly tripped over it. Someone had tucked a program just underneath. Folded in half. Slipped like a secret into the carpet seam. I crouched, picked it up, scanned the cover. Standard design. Date. Logo. Theme. Restoration and revelation. But when I flipped it open, one page was circled in pen. The list of tonight's featured donors. And in the white margin between Barrett Holdings and Wexley Trust, someone had written 3 words. He doesn't own it. My stomach clenched. There was no signature, no indication of who had left it or when. But the ink was fresh. The corner smudged where a thumb had pressed it too hard. I scanned the mezzanine. No one looked back. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper, then folded it again, tighter this time, and slid it into my purse. Whoever left it knew something. Something I hadn't been told. I moved again, this time toward the West Gallery wing. The crowds were thinner there. Guests mostly loitered around wine bars or posed near installations they didn't understand. I passed a pair of men debating sculpture theory in low voices, a woman tapping furiously at a touchscreen kiosk. Then I spotted her. The clipboard woman? She stood alone near the American Absence painting. The lights overhead flickered gently, casting halos on the frame. She didn't move when I approached, just looked up as if she'd been waiting. "You saw the note," she said quietly. I nodded. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder, then back. "You should come with me." We walked in silence through a narrow side hall into a room marked staff access only. The door clicked softly shut behind us. It wasn't an office. Not exactly. More like a prep chamber. Cabinets. Archival gloves. Scanners. A small table with folders stacked to the edge. She gestured to a chair. "I don't have long," she said, voice calm but clipped. "And you can't ask questions. Not yet." I didn't sit. She opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, and laid it flat. Inside, images, scans, contracts, shipping manifests. I recognized one document immediately. My signature. From 3 years ago. "How did you—" She held up a finger. "You gave more than money," she said. "You gave authority. And now they're trying to erase that. But they can't. Not unless you let them." A beat passed. The air between us sharpened. "You don't have to speak," she added. "You just have to stand in the right place." I left the folder unopened on the table. I didn't need to read more. The past hour had already told me enough. More than enough. "I'm not here to destroy anything," I said as I stepped back from the table. The woman with the clipboard didn't blink. "You don't have to," she said. "All you have to do is exist in the right light." She handed me a silver badge. No name, no title, just the crest of the Cambridge Foundation etched across its surface. I slipped it into my clutch without a word. When I stepped back into the hallway, the noise of the auction swelled like a wave about to break. Laughter, clinking glasses, an amplified voice announcing the next lot. I didn't return to the mezzanine. I took the main stairs. My dress moved like liquid around my legs, catching flashes of amber and bronze from the art glass chandelier above. Guests glanced over, some vaguely recognizing me, most not, but I didn't slow. At the bottom of the stairs, the east gallery opened like a stage. Everyone faced the platform at the far end, where a tall woman stood beside a sculpture under silk. She cleared her throat. "This next piece," she said, "comes from a donor who asked not to be named, but whose impact is visible across nearly every room in this museum." My heart pounded. She paused, then turned toward the sculpture. Two assistants stepped forward, lifted the silk with white gloves, and revealed it. A minimalist bronze, coiled like tension frozen mid-breath. It wasn't mine, not directly, but I'd tracked it down, pulled it from a basement auction in Ohio, paid for its transport, reframed its history. I stood 10 feet behind the crowd, still, present, visible. It took 15 seconds for my father to see me. His eyes locked. His smile didn't falter, but the twitch at his jaw betrayed him. He turned slightly, whispered to someone beside him. Then his gaze snapped back. I didn't move. Then someone else noticed. The woman on stage. She looked at me, blinked once, then said into the mic, "We'd also like to thank the Barrett Restoration Initiative, without which this installation would have remained in storage." A hush. The kind of silence that doesn't fall, but lands. All eyes turned. I didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't flinch. I just stood there, in the exact place he didn't want me to be. For a moment, it felt like a dream. One of those strange, slow ones where you're underwater but breathing, weightless and anchored at the same time. Then a camera clicked. Just one. Followed by another. And another. Flashes lit the air like fireflies. I turned, slowly, and walked along the side of the gallery. Not toward him, not toward the stage, just along the perimeter. Silent. Intentional. People parted. A donor nodded. A curator stepped aside. I stopped in front of the piece, looked at it, tilted my head just slightly, and let them watch. This wasn't about reclaiming space. It was about reminding them who put it there. I hadn't taken 5 steps away from the bronze sculpture before the air shifted. Not in the way that a crowd shifts, not in the way that attention fades, but in the way you feel heat from a door that should have been locked. Someone had entered the room who wasn't supposed to be there. Or maybe she was. I saw her before she saw me. Hair perfectly flat-ironed. Lipstick the exact mauve shade our mother used to wear. The kind of dress that photographs. Well under halogen. She always did know how to prepare for a scene. Helen, my father's second wife. She walked like someone who expected every floor to hold her weight, every wall to echo her version of the story. She moved quickly but didn't rush, her eyes scanning the perimeter like a queen counting subjects. And when she saw me, she stopped. The crowd didn't notice. Not yet. The attention was still on the stage, where the next lot was being prepared for preview. But between us, the gallery went quiet. She started walking, straight toward me. I didn't move. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since that last meeting. An awkward brunch with too many silences and too few truths. She'd said something sharp about letting go of grudges, and I had smiled like a knife. Now we stood face to face under a painting I'd once smuggled out of a failing artist's estate sale. "Courtney," she said, her tone neutral as a museum placard. "Helen," I replied, matching her temperature. She looked me over, eyes landing briefly on the silver badge at my waist. "You've made quite the entrance." "No one tried to stop me this time," I said. A pause. She folded her hands in front of her. "You should know this isn't helping anyone." I raised an eyebrow. "Helping who?" She glanced to the side. "He's under pressure tonight. This event is... I know exactly what this event is." Her lips twitched. She didn't like being interrupted. "I'm not here to ruin anything," I added. She gave a soft laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. You really believe that? I'm not the one hiding, I said, or erasing. Her jaw tightened, just slightly, enough to confirm she knew what I was talking about. You've always been dramatic, she said quietly. Even as a girl. Always needed a stage. And you've always needed an audience? That landed. She took a small step back. Not fear, just recalculation. Her hand moved toward the small pearl clasp on her clutch, then dropped. I'm only going to say this once, she whispered. If you go any further, you'll regret it. There's more at stake than you understand. I leaned in, just slightly. That's the difference between us, Helen. You act like I don't understand. She said nothing, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. The warmth in my chest had gone cold. Not rage, not panic. Clarity. Whatever this night had started as, symbolic, silent, maybe even redemptive, it wasn't just mine anymore. And whatever she meant by further, I was already halfway there. Helen vanished like she always did, leaving just enough behind to stain the air. Her perfume lingered too long. Her words even longer. But I didn't follow. I stood in place, heart steady now, not because I felt calm, but because I felt sure. If she was here and my father had seen me, and the name Barrett Restoration had just been announced to a room full of donors, then whatever quiet erasure they'd orchestrated over the past 5 years had cracked. And someone else knew it. I stepped into the Western Gallery, where the noise of the crowd thinned under the cathedral high ceiling. The room was quieter here, more reverent. Guests wandered in pairs, whispering politely over sculpture tags. And that's when I saw it. On a bench in the center of the room, between a limestone bust and a floral installation, sat a cream-colored envelope. Alone. Unmarked. But placed with intention. My eyes scanned the room. No one nearby. No one watching. I picked it up. My name was written on the front in blue ink. Slanted. Careful. Familiar. Handwriting I hadn't seen since I was 23. A tremor passed through me as I slid a finger under the seal. The paper inside was thicker than expected. Not a letter. Legal weight. 2 pages. No greeting. No goodbye. Just 3 sentences. The Providence Trail leads back to you. They've withheld more than they've erased. If you still have the key, use it, before they do. I read it twice. Then a third time. The back of my throat burned. There was no signature. But the message was unmistakable. Someone inside the structure wanted me to act. And they weren't guessing. They knew. I folded the letter and tucked it under my palm just as a woman approached from the left. Excuse me, she said softly. You're Courtney, right? I didn't answer, just waited. She extended a hand, not to shake mine, but to offer something else. A security lanyard. Gold. Marked Level 2. Collections access. My pulse jumped. Where did you get this? I asked. She smiled faintly. You're being summoned. By who? But she was already walking away. I looked down at the badge, then around the room, then back at the envelope in my hand. They wanted me below. The Cambridge Foundation stored its most sensitive works in the vaults beneath the main gallery. Paintings not yet authenticated, collections stuck in legal limbo, disputed pieces held from public view until claims were resolved. Level 2 wasn't for guests. It wasn't even for most staff. Only curators, conservators, and trust executors were granted access. I hadn't been down there in half a decade, but my clearance, it had never technically been revoked. I walked slowly, deliberately, across the back corridor toward the restricted elevators. My heels clicked like questions. The badge felt heavier with every step. As I waited for the doors to open, I slipped the envelope inside my clutch, along with the folded program, the silver pin, and the truth I wasn't sure I wanted to read again. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside. The doors closed. And for the first time in years, I descended into a place they swore I'd never enter again. The elevator doors opened with a soft hiss. Level 2 was colder than I remembered. The air down there always smelled like varnish and metal shelves, like secrets kept on ice. Only one guard stood at the desk. He glanced up, saw the lanyard, and nodded without speaking. No clipboard, no signature. Just a swipe of my badge and the silent approval of someone else's instruction. I walked slowly down the main corridor. The lights overhead flickered with that familiar museum hum. Subdued, precise. I passed sealed rooms marked for textile quarantine, temperature-controlled glass, and disputed provenance. Then, near the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar. Inside, darkness. I stepped in. Motion lights clicked on. And there it was. Propped against the back wall, half wrapped in archival cloth, stood a canvas I hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. It wasn't just a painting. It was mine. The piece was called Anchor in Ash, a mixed-medium restoration I'd undertaken at 26. It was never meant to be displayed. It had been too personal, too experimental, too raw. A recovery project from a burned-out storage unit that I'd spent months reconstructing. The frame was hand-welded. The back bore my initials, barely legible under layers of re-lacquered age. I thought they'd gotten rid of it. I thought he had. And yet here it was. Hidden, not destroyed. I moved closer. Taped to the back of the frame was a slip of paper. The seal of the Cambridge Foundation stamped across the top. Below it, a transfer request. To be deaccessioned following the restructuring of holdings under Barrett Holdings LLC. Dated 2 years ago. Approved, but never carried out. The signature line was blank. Someone had blocked it. My chest tightened. This wasn't just about taste or curation. This was legal. Someone had tried to remove the piece from official records. Permanently. And someone else had intervened. I pulled out the envelope from my purse and compared the ink. The same pen. The same slant. The same invisible hand that circled, "He doesn't own it." They knew this was still here. And they knew I'd find it. Behind me, the vault door clicked. Not loudly, but enough to make me freeze. I turned. No one entered. Just a sound. A reminder. I wasn't alone down here. Not anymore. I rewrapped the canvas slowly, slid the request form back into its sleeve, and placed both into the protective unit beside the wall. Then I backed out, never turning fully, never breathing too loud. At the elevator, my fingers hovered over the call button. Then I heard it. A soft cough. Close. I spun around. No one in sight. But the envelope I'd just retucked into my clutch? Gone. In its place, on the floor, beneath the security camera, lay a different one. Cream-colored. Sealed. This time, the handwriting on the front was his. My father's. The cream envelope in my hand felt heavier than the one it replaced. His handwriting hadn't changed. Still that slight tilt. Still that careful control. Like every letter was measured for how it would sound when spoken aloud. I stared at it for 10 long seconds before slipping it into my clutch. Not here. Not in this hallway. Not with that vault door still whispering behind me like a secret waiting to retighten. I pressed the elevator button. When the doors closed, I was finally alone. The ride to the ground floor felt slower than the descent, like the air inside the cab had thickened, resisting upward movement. I didn't blink. I didn't move. The letter pulsed against my leg like it had its own heartbeat. Back on the main level, the gala had shifted. Lights slightly dimmer now. Guests clustered in tighter groups. Drinks stronger. Smiles looser. The auction was nearing its end. People smelled the real deals coming. I made my way to a small sitting alcove near the east window. A velvet settee faced away from the crowd. Just enough distance to give me cover. Just enough shadow to open something private in a public room. I broke the seal. Inside were 3 pages. No greeting. Just this. If you're reading this, it means you ignored every boundary I put in place. You came anyway. You couldn't just let it lie. And maybe that's what makes you dangerous. I blinked. Dangerous. The initiative wasn't supposed to be yours. You built it, yes, but it was never designed to outlast the structure I gave it. Your refusal to align made it legally complicated and emotionally ungrateful. I kept reading, each sentence colder than the last. You never understood what it means to preserve legacy. You wanted autonomy, recognition. But what you risked, by staying visible, by making donations under a different name, was far more than embarrassment. You embarrassed me anyway. I stopped breathing. There was no warmth in the lines, no apology, no admission, only strategy. You may think showing up tonight gives you power, but this isn't your space anymore. And if you proceed with any form of claim, understand that consequences will follow. The final line wasn't signed. It was typed. Typed. I folded the letter once, then again until the paper was small enough to disappear into my palm. I didn't feel hurt. Not anymore. I felt precision. He hadn't written to reach me. He'd written to warn me, to neutralize, to remind me of the hierarchy he thought still held. He didn't understand. This was no longer about my name. This was about his signature at the bottom of a contract I now had, and one I hadn't shown anyone. Yet. I stood up, adjusted my dress, and walked back toward the atrium. The final auction item had just been introduced. Something called Inheritance Number 3, a layered collage made from shredded legal documents and vintage family photos. Too on the nose to be coincidence? As the crowd clustered closer, I stayed back. I wasn't bidding. I was watching. Someone brushed past me, murmuring my name. I turned, but the voice was already gone, and tucked inside the pocket of my coat. One more envelope. Smaller, square. This one wasn't from him. It was from her. The envelope was pale gray, linen texture, heavier than it looked. Her handwriting was flawless. Tight, upright, not dramatic, but meticulous. Like every word had been practiced first on a separate sheet of paper. I slipped it open under the arch of a marble column, shielding it with my shoulder. The crowd behind me buzzed around the final bid. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone clinked a glass too hard. But here, in this small, suspended breath, I read it. This wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't agree to all of it. There's something you need to see. End of the West Hall. Room with no name. Key code's still the same. She hadn't signed it. She didn't need to. Only one person would assume I remembered a 6-digit code from a decade ago. Only one person would think I'd care. But I did. I folded the paper, slid it behind my badge, and started walking. Not fast. Not hiding. Just steady. The West Hall narrowed past the wine bar, past the staff break archway, past the corridor most guests thought led to a restroom. I knew better. The door at the end was metal. No plaque, no keypad, just a discreet black panel near the handle. I pressed 6 numbers. The light turned green. The door clicked open. Inside, silence. Low-lit storage room. No windows. One table, 3 chairs. A single spotlight angled over a plexiglass display case. I stepped in, closed the door behind me, and saw what she wanted me to find. It wasn't art, not technically. It was documentation. Inside the display case, original contracts, internal memos, a printout of an email string, names I recognized, project notes with my annotations, and a single check, never cashed, dated 6 years ago. My name was on every page, not as a donor, not as a guest, as a founder. Barrett Restoration Initiative, 501c3, co-launched under provisional joint ownership pending final signatory approval. Only it had been approved. By me. And voided later. By him. The check was a buyout. The kind offered quietly, post-fallout, post-restructuring, as hush money in the form of settlement for emotional damages. Only I never took it, and now it was framed like an artifact. The door behind me creaked open. I didn't flinch. She stepped in. Helen? Same dress? Same face? Same controlled expression. but she wasn't performing anymore. "You kept everything," I said, not turning. "No," she said. "I protected it." I turned now. She stepped further in, closing the door behind her. "He wanted to burn it all," she said quietly. "Said it was cleaner that way, said you'd moved on. But I saw what he buried. I saw the edits, the omissions. I knew it wasn't over." "And you waited?" I asked. She shook her head. "I prepared." A long pause hung between us. "Why now?" I said finally. She looked down, then at the check. "Because he's going to sell it. The initiative. Tonight. Or at least start the process. The contracts are here, upstairs. All he needs is the last board signature." I stared at her. "He can't sell what I still own," I said. Her eyes met mine. "Then you need to prove you still do." I looked down at the glass case, and for the first time in years, I knew what I was going to do next. I didn't rush. Rushing gives them power. It says I'm nervous, I'm grateful to be here, I'll take whatever seat you pretend to offer. I wasn't asking for a seat anymore. I left the gray envelope and every photocopied document exactly where I found them. Let Helen watch the door. Let her play silent witness. My role had changed. I walked the length of the West Hall with my badge in full view. The boardroom wasn't on the map. That was intentional. But I remembered the way. Left past the sculpture rotunda, right at the private elevator marked Administration. No plaque. No welcoming committee. Just one button that blinked when scanned by the right clearance. The elevator doors opened. There were voices inside the room before I even stepped out. Laughter. Low murmurs. Glasses clinking against coasters, not toasts. Then, "All in favor?" That's when I walked in. 7 men and women sat around a horseshoe-shaped walnut. Table, every seat occupied, except one, at the far end, the head. My father stood beside it, hand on the backrest, mid-sentence. His expression didn't change when he saw me. Not visibly, but his fingers tightened, whitening at the knuckles. One board member glanced up, startled. Another raised a brow. I didn't speak right away. I just walked to the table and placed a copy of the initiative's founding documents at the center. No flourish. No announcement. Just the facts. Silence descended. Someone cleared their throat. The woman in the green jacket leaned forward. "I'm sorry, this session is private." "I know," I said. My voice was calm. I turned slightly toward my father. "But so is a backroom vote to sell something I co-founded." He opened his mouth. I raised my hand. "You can speak when I finish." That silenced even him. "I've reviewed the deaccession forms. I've seen the blocked signatures, the forged exit letters, and the voided transfer that never cleared." I met every eye around the table. "What you're voting on tonight isn't legal, and it isn't final." I pulled out the final page, held it up. "Here's my signature. Not rescinded, not transferred, still active." A murmur swept the room. He tried to recover. "Trespassing into vaults." "Isn't trespassing when your clearance still scans green." His eyes flared. "This isn't about spite," I continued. "This is about record. If you erase my name, you erase the woman who tracked the Morano collection, recovered the Hayden tapes, and personally restored 4 out of the 7 launch pieces now branded as Barrett Initiative Core Holdings." The woman in green turned to him. "Is that accurate?" He didn't answer. Didn't need to. I placed the silver badge beside the documents. "Revote if you want, but this time my name stays on the minutes." Then I sat down. In the empty chair. His chair. He stood frozen for a breath, then slowly removed his hand from the backrest. I folded my hands on the table. The vote didn't proceed. The board didn't speak. Not yet. But in the silence that followed, I felt it shift. This wasn't his room anymore. No one reached for their glass. No one shuffled papers. The boardroom had turned into a gallery of frozen figures, each one recalculating what my presence now meant. Then the woman in the green jacket spoke again. But this time, she didn't ask my father anything. She turned to me. "Courtney," she said, "may I see the original incorporation record?" Not Ms. Barrett. Not Miss. Not you. My name. The first time someone here had said it. I slid the folder across the table. Her hands didn't tremble when she opened it, but her eyes did flick once toward the man at the far end of the room, the one still standing with a calm that now looked brittle. She read quickly, then tapped the final paragraph with a manicured nail. This clause was removed in the current charter. Illegally, I said. No ratification, no third-party witness. Just an updated summary sent after my access was revoked. Another man leaned forward. Gray suit. Narrow glasses. The one who hadn't looked at me once since I entered. He adjusted his lapel. That summary was, "Written by your assistant," I said, "on a Sunday, with metadata showing a name change logged at 11:46 p.m. after a document labeled Final C Docs failed to open properly." His mouth closed. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," I continued, "but if you're going to vote to erase me, at least have the decency to acknowledge who I was when this began." The woman in green sighed, but it was the youngest member at the table who spoke next. Dark blazer. Maybe 35. She hadn't spoken once. "I was told," she said softly, "that you'd walked away." I turned to her. "I was told," she repeated, "that the stress had been too much, that your contributions weren't significant, that the initiative was just his." Her voice faltered. "And you believed that?" She swallowed. "At first. But I've seen the donor trail. I've seen the restoration reports. Half of those artifacts passed through your hands before they ever hit our walls." Another pause. Then, "I'm sorry." Something inside me tightened. Not because I needed the apology, but because it proved just how easy it had been. For them to lie. For her to help. The woman in green finally closed the file. "This needs to be brought to review," she said to the room. "Formally. We can't proceed on a vote that may be built on manipulated records." A murmur of agreement. My father didn't sit. He didn't speak. But his silence said everything. The room wasn't his. Not anymore. The woman in green turned to him. "Unless you'd like to dispute the signature clause, Barrett?" He glanced at me, then back to her. "No," he said. "Just that. No." I stood. The documents were already in their hands. The truth was out. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was that I'd made it impossible for them to pretend. And someone had finally admitted they helped pretend. I turned to leave, and as I reached the door, the youngest board member called after me. "Courtney." I turned. "There's one more file," she said. "It was sealed 5 years ago, under your name." "Where is it?" She hesitated. "In the archival lockup, level 3. Level 3 wasn't listed on the elevator panel. Not under public access, not under staff. It was hidden behind a double key entry. One digital, one mechanical, and marked only by a number etched into steel. 1313. Helen didn't follow me down there. Neither did anyone else. The youngest board member handed me a temporary clearance slip, unsigned with a time limit scribbled in the corner. 30 min. Enough to find it. Not enough to drown in it. The elevator descended slower than usual. A mechanical groan in the shaft, like the building itself, hesitated to let me in. The light above the doors flickered once. Then again. Then it stopped. And opened. The hallway was colder. Not just in temperature, but in feeling. This wasn't a storage area. It was a burial ground. Metal shelving on both sides. Each row tagged with dates, codes, sequence numbers. Dead-end aisles with motion sensors that lit only when you were deep inside them. Too far to turn around. I walked. My fingers brushed the labels. Most of it was dull. Finance records, acquisition history, damage reports, expired insurance ledgers. Then I saw it. CB Arch 042, my initials. The box was smaller than I expected. Archival gray. A white label in the corner with a faded timestamp. 5 years. Sealed. Do not rotate without executive order. I pulled it from the shelf. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I placed it on the table in the center of the row, under the single motion-activated light, and opened it. Inside were photographs, stacks of them, all unframed, unlabeled, but unmistakable. Images of me, restoring paintings, signing donor letters, standing beside exhibitions I wasn't credited for. Screenshots of internal emails, scans of workshop blueprints I'd drawn by hand. Then, the contract. The first one, signed, scanned, and marked in red pen. Restructure without notifying subject. Legal pending. I stared at it, but I didn't stop. At the bottom of the box was something heavier. A binder. I opened it and froze. It was the transcript from the arbitration meeting, the one I'd been locked out of, the one they said never happened. Here, line by line, was their strategy to erase me. My father's voice was transcribed at the top. Emotionally unstable, compromised work environment, difficult to collaborate with. Then, Helen's. She made herself impossible to protect. Then, silence. A long redacted section, pages of it, then a handwritten note at the end. If this resurfaces, we deny completely. Say it was grief. Say she misunderstood. Say the initiative never had formal dual ownership. My chest was still, not because I didn't feel it, but because everything I suspected they'd actually written down, documented, filed, preserved. I closed the binder, and that's when I saw it. At the very bottom of the box, taped flat against the inside panel, a photograph, one I'd never seen. Me and him, years ago, at the opening of our first exhibit. I'm laughing. He's looking straight at the camera, hand resting on my shoulder. Captioned beneath in his handwriting, "Couldn't have done this without her." It wasn't a lie, but it was the last time he said it aloud. The elevator hummed louder on the way up, like it could sense what I carried. The box wasn't heavy, but it made the air feel different. Like history finally had weight, and it wasn't on my shoulders anymore. I didn't go back to the boardroom. I went further, into the main atrium where the final guests were lingering, still half drunk on champagne and false importance. The auction had closed. Music played low. The winning bidders glowed. And then I stepped into the light, with the archival box in my hands. Silence spread like fire. A few turned, then more, then all. My heels echoed as I walked to the center podium. The same place they'd introduced Barrett Holdings. The same place they'd read the anonymous donor's name. I set the box down, cleared my throat. No microphone. Didn't need one. 5 years ago, I began, my name was removed from this institution's records. Not legally, not honorably, but quietly, surgically, like a rot they didn't want to explain. Gasps. No one moved. I opened the box, held up the transcript. This is the arbitration record you were never told about, where I was named emotionally unstable for asking to keep my own signature on my own work. More murmurs. I held up the photograph. This is the exhibit you all celebrated. He called it a solo effort, but he wrote this the night before. I passed it to the closest guest. Let them read it. Couldn't have done this without her. Their silence turned brittle. I held up the binder. These pages aren't accusations. They're receipts. The lies you believed, documented, filed, preserved, alongside the work you praised but refused to trace. Someone called out from the back. Is this a statement or a lawsuit? I turned. It's a reckoning. I paused. Let the room feel it. Then I reached into the box one last time, pulled out the check. The buyout they offered me was never about money. It was about memory. They didn't want me erased from the initiative. They wanted me erased from the narrative. I placed the check flat on the podium. And now I'm returning it. Then I stepped back. The air was sharp with shock. My father stood at the edge of the crowd, pale but not moving, frozen like one of the statues they'd hung me beside in that vault. Helen stood 2 feet behind him. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. The woman in green approached the podium. She didn't speak, just laid her fingers on the transcript and nodded once. The youngest board member followed. Then a third. Like dominoes in reverse. Each one stepped forward. Each one touched a piece of the box. Until only he hadn't moved. I met his eyes. He didn't flinch. But he didn't come closer either. I didn't need him to. This wasn't about his approval. This was about my visibility. I reached for the last page. The one with the original initiative charter. My signature. His beside it. And tore it in half. The crowd gasped. I held it up like a verdict. This, I said, was never about family. It was about authorship. And I'm reclaiming mine. The glass doors swung open without resistance. I didn't look back at the crowd. I didn't need to. I'd said what needed to be said. Now I wanted air. Cool night wrapped around me like water hitting skin just after fire. The parking lot was mostly empty. The valet station unmanned. Security guards huddled near the service entrance, pretending not to look. I kept walking, shoes in one hand, the box still in the other. When I reached the edge of the courtyard, I saw him. Sitting alone, not in the back seat of some waiting car, on the stone bench beneath the plaque that bore our last name. His tie was loose, his jaw locked. For once, he didn't speak first. I stood a few feet away, saying nothing. He looked at the box, then at me, then down. "They applauded you?" he said finally. "Even the ones who helped write you out." "That's what cowards do," I answered. "They cheer when the lights change direction." He looked up. There was no apology in his eyes, just the faintest trace of something I'd never seen in him before. Uncertainty. "You always thought," I said, stepping closer, "that keeping me out protected your reputation, that it saved the initiative from being contaminated by my name." "It wasn't personal," he said. "Then you really never knew me." Silence. Sharp. Then he said it. "I didn't think you'd come back." "I didn't come back," I said. "I walked in." I placed the box on the bench beside him. He didn't touch it. "I'm not here for closure," I continued. "I'm not interested in healing the version of you that lives in other people's heads." His mouth tensed. "I built that initiative," I said, "and you sold it like it was born from nothing." "You left," he said. "No," I corrected. "I was erased." He flinched. I stepped back. "You didn't expect me to remember everything. That was your mistake. You taught me how to document, how to preserve. And I preserved everything, even the rot." He looked at the ground. "But not with shame. With calculation. You know what happens now," he said. "I do," I replied. "You lose legacy. I gain authorship. And the initiative? Lives. But differently." He finally looked at me, like he might say something else. But I was done waiting. I turned, walking toward the black car parked in the shadows. Helen sat in the driver's seat. Window down. She didn't say anything. Just unlocked the passenger door. I slid in. We drove in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. "They're calling it a restoration event." "Let them," I said. "They're going to want you on the next panel." "I won't be." "Why not?" I looked out the window, watched the lights blur past. "Because panels ask for insight," I whispered, "and I'm no longer here to offer explanations. Only authorship." We passed the last turn into the city, the skyline ahead, and just before the bridge, I turned back once more, not to the museum, but to the girl I used to be, buried in a vault, now walking free.